this ramble is going to be on my personal biases, and not in a good way. Not telling you what my personal biases is. This is, kind of. I mentioned this when I reviewed the original Wasp album. How my personal biases kind of kept me from ever really listening to Wasp, giving them a fair shot, and treating them as anything more than a punchline. And when you look at the gimmicky kind of stuff and whatnot, and the fact that no, they are not as bad as Gwar. And please, guys, I don't want to have to go looking for Gwar albums. Don't ask. Gwar is fun to watch, not necessarily listen to. Okay, moving on from that point. Sorry, give me a second here. All right. That campy. Okay, so it's not the same type of theatrical production as Alice. This was trying to outdo Alice, get grosser, bloodier, blah, 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 which is cool, all right, Obviously influenced by Alice, No ifs, ands, or buts on that one. However, that being said, not necessarily can be taken seriously. I can't, sometimes I can't. And because of that, most glam metal bands, most of the LA music scene, I ignored for the same reason. I didn't listen to Motley Crue when Motley Crue was popular. I didn't. Honestly, I did not get into Motley Crue. The first Motley Crue, anything that I ever owned or had major access to, my step-parent, my dad and my stepmom, had Motley Crue's Decade of Decadence. And they got that through Columbia House when it first came out. And for the longest time, that was the only Motley Crue album I listened to or had exposure to, and that was more than enough for me. Later on, I bought Red, White, and Crue because it was a double, and that was a really good collection. And since then, I've picked up Dr. Feelgood, and Tracy had Theater of Pain? Yeah. Whatever one that one is. The one with Home Sweet Home that everybody mocks. But, the only LA hard rock heavy metal bands that I actually owned albums from technically would have been Van Halen. And that's if you want to include Van Halen as an LA band, which, depends on who you talk to, depends on whether or not you do. GNR would be the exception. But once again, I know that GNR is definitely an LA band, but at the same time, they're not the same as the LA bands. They are and they're not. There's so much fluctuation and similarity between all of them and stuff like that. But, GNR I got into as soon as GNR came out. Van Halen was something that was always on the radio as long as I can remember, right? So, I always heard Van Halen. I remember when they switched from, David to Sammy. And I remember Sammy before Sammy was in Van Halen. Going with all that, though, when it comes to that, it's my personal biases that kept me from listening to a lot of that, because a lot of it was either all like one hit and filler, or it was all show, no actual substance in a lot of cases to me. Gwar being an example, Gwar's all show and, not a lot of substance. That's okay. But I like my shows with substance. I like my Alice Cooper. I like my Rob Zombie. I like my Marilyn Manson. I like show and substance. Wasp, would have had show and substance. Halloween, that was an eye opener. There's other times where my biases have come into effect as well, and not even necessarily my biases. Like when rap first started really hitting the airwaves between 88 and 90, and I mean like really like mainstream. Okay, well, being that I live next door to Detroit, and we have such a huge black population in Detroit, that obviously we actually got hip hop stations that way, or rap stations, stuff like that. And when that stuff really started kind of breaking out and going, mainstream and whatnot, I got to hear a lot of it that way early on. And I remember being into it a little bit in the earlier days, when it was fun and it was cheesy and it was more. We didn't get a lot of exposure, obviously, to NWA and stuff like that because of the language content. But the fun stuff like DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, parents just don't understand. There was a bunch of other ones like that. I remember Salt and Peppa, all that kind of stuff, the radio-friendly stuff. I didn't mind. I got a lot of exposure to that on the radio, and I remember putting some of that on mixtapes off the radio, my dad listening to it, and my dad kind of like, and then that kind of affected my biases as well because of my age. And have I gone back and listened to rap since? No, I listen to some, and I listen to enough that I can tell you who's who and what's what, and I have, my personal preferences and tastes, like I'm a big fan of Busta Rhymes, even though he's really big on the N-word, which makes it impossible for me to sing along. And like everybody, I like Eminem. But, it goes with those biases where it really kind of kept me from getting into certain things and listening to certain things and stuff like that. And then, you also have Vanilla Ice, which was really good at turning you off of listening to certain things and giving you biases. Yeah, those days. MC Hammer, too. Can't touch this. And too diligent to quit. Okay, where I'm trying to go with this is I, as a grown-ass adult, because of all the biases I know I had as a kid, teenager, even as a young adult in my 20s, I really stretch and go outside of my comfort zones now. That's why I do reviews for albums that I normally would never listen to. That's why I took my family's albums and stuff like that. Hold on, I get a cough. Sorry about that, folks. Dry throat. I'll probably just drop the volume down. Anyways, might be a good time to wrap this up. Don't have biases. That's where I'm trying to go with this. If you're a young person watching this, go out of your comfort zone. Explore new music. I know younger people are a lot more open to new music than we were back in our days. We were a lot more cliquey. Because our music was how we defined ourselves, right? You were a rocker, or you were a hip-hopper, or, you were a club kid, or, stuff like that. That was how you defined yourself. But even amongst my own metalhead rocker contemporaries, I was always on the fringe and on the outside. Like metalheads, I was too much of a rocker for the metalheads, too much of a metalhead for the rockers. And the funny part is classic rock was what I listened to the most, and because outwardly I look like such a metalhead hard rocker, the classic rock guys had a hard time taking me seriously, even though I could hold, the best conversations with them, any day of the week on any subject of classic rock bands. It is what it is, right, folks? So yeah, I'm going to wrap this up here and say, If you have biases, get over them. Just get over them. It's not worth it. Have taste in music. Have preferences. But don't have biases. All right. Well, let me know what you think. Other topics we should ramble on about. We'll do it. Drop me a line down below in the comment section, please, and thank you. While you're on your way down there, like button, subscribe button, bell for notifications, a couple links worth checking out. Otherwise, folks, peace, love, take care.